Afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to a special session of the OBX Wave Report where we discuss all things waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle. And for this session, we're going to talk climate. We're going to talk climate science particularly, and we're going to talk what are the climate scientists talking about. Why are we doing this in association with a surf report? And the main reason is that we as surfers, many of us are interested in the ocean and the health of the ocean environment, certainly. And many of us are interested in the health of the coastlines and the beaches where we go to surf and where we live. And then just as human beings, because, all surfers are humans too, this is an issue that affects all of us. But what I will say as we get into the opener of this is that if you are a surfer, you're out there in the weather and the climate system all the time. And whether you know it or not, you're experiencing firsthand the effects of both pollution and the climate crisis driven by fossil fuel burning. Um, so So that's the opener to our climate science chat, which we've been doing every Thursday to amplify the messages of climate scientists, not the distractions or the weird zeitgeist that tends to flip up when it comes to issues of climate and sustainability. And unfortunately, I don't have like all the time to go in like to all the things that climate scientists are chatting about. So I encourage you to follow them on the social media and also to do what you can to amplify their messaging, which will help to inform and empower and to particularly to empower us to save the things that we care about. And we as surfers care deeply about the health of our coastlines and the ocean that we spend so much time in. All right, so for our start today, we're going to start with Dr. Michael Mann. And what is Dr. Michael Mann talking about? Kind of a fascinating thing to me, actually, a book that I want to read. He's talking about The Heat Will Kill Us First by Jeff Goodell, author and senior fellow at the Atlantic. And the Atlantic Council is a fantastic organization that has highlighted a number of issues with regards to climate change. Jeff Goodell is a fantastic writer, a fantastic speaker. I encourage you to follow all of his good work. And what I'm going to do is, make sure I'm following him. Indeed, I am. So, yay. We are following Jeff. Cheers to Jeff. Dr. Michael Mann is talking about a Perry House Energy Week discussion at Pennsylvania State University, where Dr. Mann is a professor, later this month, featuring his friends Jeff Goodell and Faye Flam, a Bloomberg columnist, podcaster, science geek, Caltech grad. I'm going to follow you, Faye. Cheers. And two of the very best of the climate science beat. And they're going to be discussing, I think in part, based on the title, a new book by Jeff Goodell called The Heat Will Kill You First. And it's a conversation about extreme heat and how it impacts our lives. And in particular, one of the things that I discovered as I was doing research into climate risk is the effect of extreme heat on the human body. And there's a threshold at around 36 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature, which is near the human body temperature, where the human body can't transport heat away from the surface of the skin through evaporation. And as this is a pretty deadly condition that will kill you quick. if you are outside and exposed to that extreme heat. And we don't see wet bulb temperatures in that range yet, really, in any or many locations around the globe. But what happens with fossil fuel burning is that it injects not only heat into the Earth system, but also more moisture into the air in the form of evaporation. And so you end up with more heat and humidity. And it's heat and humidity that cause those high wet bulb temperatures that can get into the lethal range. And it was another climate scientist that highlighted this particular risk. It was Dr. James Hansen. And even since we have seen just a 1.1 degrees Celsius warming of the global system, we have seen more extreme heat waves that have resulted in killing heat. And it appears that Jeff Goodell is focusing on this specific aspect of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. And I'm going to read the little blurb, a little bit of the blurb here from The Heat Will Kill You First. Life and Death on a Scorched Planet by Jeff Goodell. Um, and this is the Kindle edition, but it's also available in hardcover. And I'm just going to read a couple of blurbs from here, which are quite striking. When heat comes, it's invisible. It doesn't bend tree branches or blow hair across your face to let you know it's arrived. The sun feels like the barrel of a gun pointed at you. And yeah, so that's whew, that speaks to me. Um, and I'm also going to read this other blurb here. It's just a paragraph. The world is waking up to a new reality. Wildfires are now seasonal in California. The Northeast is getting less and less snow each winter, and the ice sheets in the Arctic and the Antarctic are melting fast. Heat is the first order threat that drives all other impacts of the climate crisis. And as the temperature rises, it is revealing fault lines in our governments, our politics, our economy, and our values. The basic science is not complicated. Stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, and the global temperature will stop rising tomorrow. Stop burning fossil fuels in 50 years, and the temperature will keep rising for 50 years, making parts of our planet virtually uninhabitable. It's up to us. The hotter it gets, the deeper and wider our fault lines will open. And just reading this paragraph reminds me that reminds me of Jeff's skill at weaving various threads of a story together. And what he seems to have done, and I have not read the book yet, and I need to read this book, it's going immediately on my list, is to talk about how the center of gravity of the climate crisis is heat, and how that heat has this wide ranging cascade of effects. Um, Effects that, if the fossil fuel burning continues to amplify that heat, will become more and more dangerous to us all. So I am going to listen to Dr. Michael Mann. I am going to put this on my reading list, and I'm going to read it. And hopefully at some point I will be able to review this for you. But this is what Dr. Michael Mann is talking about today, a climate scientist. All right, let's go to Professor Catherine Hayhoe. And I encourage you to follow her to please amplify what she is saying. She's a climate scientist, chief scientist at nature.org, professor at Texas Tech, climate ambassador, um, and a fantastic advocate for clean energy deployment and for the cessation of fossil fuel burning. And she's retweeting a quote, a statement from Dr. Adam Levy, climate over at Climate Adam. I haven't followed Climate Adam, so I'm going to follow him. And he says, explain to me why Explain to me, like I'm five, why this makes any economic sense when every country in the world has agreed emissions need to reach zero in the coming decades. And right now we see the big banks still investing in heat, still investing in harm. Michael Thomas stating that, I need to follow him as well, the largest banks in the world are still lending more money to fossil fuel projects than clean energy projects. And it's very simple. It's what our values represent as a society are often what we invest in. And if we are investing in fossil fuels, we are investing in future harm. We're investing in heat, deadly heat, and destabilizing heat. And if we're investing in clean energy, then we're investing in sustainability and life supports and better economies, economies that can survive and remain stable. We're investing in democracies and not in authoritarianism. If we're investing in fossil fuels, we're investing in dictatorships and tyranny and decline. I mean, there is a clear choice here, and one choice is prosperous and good and helpful, and the other choice is harmful and devastating. Um, and so right now, what is money valuing? Money still values devastation over benevolence. And that needs to change if we are going to live in a benevolent world and not in a devastating, terrible world. And it's very simple. Honestly, there's really no need to explain to someone why, like they're five. The main way of saying it, in my opinion, is that they're bad choices being made, and that cynicism is, I think, the primary driver of those bad choices. And that's what Professor Catherine Hayhoe is talking about right now today. Now let's go on to Peter Glick. And Peter Glick is a scientist. He is the co-founder of the Pacific Institute. His focus is on climate and water, and he is the 2018 Carl Sagan Award recipient for public communications. And today he is talking about the impacts of the Ukraine-Russia war on water and water systems during the first 3 months. The results of a new study just published in Nature Sustainability. And we know that war does have harmful impacts on sustainability. War is just generally horrible. And the unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine by Russia in its mad pursuit of conquest and destruction of a burgeoning democracy, destruction of the national identity of a burgeoning democracy, is also having bad effects on water sustainability, not just for Ukraine, but for the region and for the world. Yet another indicator how fossil fuels, in this case in the form of a petrostate in Russia, create global instability and are linked to war and insecurity, not just for the regions impacted by war from an aggressive petrostate, but also for the region and for the globe. And according to Nature, just going to read a little bit of the abstract here for you guys. The armed conflict between Ukraine and Russia that began in late February 2022 has far-reaching environmental consequences, especially regarding water resources and management. Here we analyze the multifaceted impacts of the military actions on freshwater resources and water infrastructure during the first 3 months of conflict. We identified the nature of the impacts, the kind of pressures imposed on the water sector, and the negative consequences for the availability and quality of freshwater resources for the civilian population. Our results showed that many water infrastructures such as dams at reservoirs, water supply and treatment systems, and subsurface mines have been impacted or are at risk from military actions. Continuation of the conflict will have multiple negative sustainability impacts, not only in Ukraine, but also on a global scale, hampering achievement of clean water, sanitation, conservation, and sustainable use of water resources and energy and food security. And so again, we see the links between fossil fuels and petrostates and global conflict. This in stark realization here in Ukraine, and then also the destruction of Ukraine's infrastructure generating harm to global sustainability and sustainability in the region. So I encourage you to follow Peter Glick and to amplify his messages. And if you get a chance to read this article in Nature on sustainability, it will make you more intelligent and more understanding of how things are interrelated in our world and how important sustainability is to the global system. And then last of all, I'm going to go to Terry Hughes, who is a scientist. He's perhaps the premier global scientist on the issue of coral reefs, certainly the premier expert on the Great Barrier Reef. And Terry Hughes here is, I just wanted to highlight this response by Terry Hughes to PC Doherty, an immunologist. And he asks cogently, how much of the funding for negative emissions technology and solar radiation modification? So negative emissions technology is when you try to capture carbon that is being emitted through fossil fuel burning or and well, negative emissions is also okay. So there's the carbon capture technology that there's a lot of research for fossil fuel burning, and lots of negative emission technology though is looking at capturing carbon from the atmosphere using this tech, and also possibly having like a kind of biofuels carbon capture system where you do things like burn biomass and capture the carbon from the biomass as you generate things like electricity, which would be a negative emission technology. And then the solar radiation management or modification technology is throwing stuff up into the air, into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight away, or putting stuff out in space to reflect the sunlight away. So the question is related to this. How much of the funding for negative emissions technology and solar radiation modification is coming from fossil fuel companies and governments who support business as usual emissions of greenhouse gases? Will captured carbon be used as offsets, enabling even more pollution? And this is a cogent argument. The best pathway when it comes to managing climate crisis is to halt fossil fuel burning and replace it with clean energy. And then if you need to deploy the negative emissions technology later on, as as the Earth system has heated up beyond safe living conditions, as in the heat will kill you first, then maybe looking at negative emissions becomes helpful. And then maybe looking at solar radiation management and modification as a stopgap becomes one of those things that you might want to look at. But what has tended to happen is that the fossil fuel industry has tended to promote these technologies, which are less reliable at managing emissions or reducing them, as a cover for continuing to burn fossil fuels. And if that becomes the case, then the global system is much worse off. And as Jeff Goodall warns, the heat will indeed keep coming, and it will kill you first, because the negative emissions technology is generally at scale very expensive, and the solar radiation management only masks a portion of the problem and may generate Frankenstein-like effects for your weather and climate system as you throw up this stuff to reflect the sun's light away. The sun's light, which the Earth system is kind of already uniquely balanced for. So Terry Hughes throwing out this very cogent question. And we've been dealing with some tough issues here as we talk about what the climate scientists are chatting about. But underlying it all, and I'm just going to go back to what I do every day with my wave report, is talk about asking people to support the mass deploying of clean energy. Um, the underlying message here is that there is hope, and the hope comes from the clean energy. And so, and the messaging that we are seeing from the scientists is both hope and a warning. It's the warning that continuing to burn fossil fuels is the bad path. So we need to look to hope. We need to look to the mass deployment of clean energy as the center of gravity in dealing with the climate crisis and removing in many ways also the power of bad actor petrostates to harm sustainability further by pursuing paths of aggression, as we have seen in Ukraine. So, though the messages today from the climate scientists that I've decided to highlight are tough, the underlying feature is that there is hope. And the hope coming from cessation of burning fossil fuels through the mass deployment of clean energy, because we do have the alternatives. As Dr. Michael Mann, as Professor Catherine Hayhoe, as Peter Glick, and as Terry Hughes would say. And if either of these scientists believe I have misrepresented them in saying that, please correct me. But in the years of following you and listening to what you have been saying, this is the message that I have received. And I'm just here to help to amplify your messages. I am a threat analyst, from a past life, at heart a surfer, someone who lives on the coastline, someone who does not want the heat to kill you first, or me, or to ruin our lives here together. So thank you for joining me for this special session of the OBX Wave Report, and we are going to get down to the coastline in a matter of about half an hour or so. So I